So a little bit of introduction of Sergio, right? I met him at the very first Artline Barcelona event because at the time he was working as CTO of Rakuten Europe. And that event we were interviewing what was the CEO of Rakuten in Spain, Marc Vicente, and we started talking then, and we basically, this relationship grew into a friendship, and basically he's been really helpful for us, introducing us to some speakers, gave us some clients at MarsBased as well. He set up a similar company like ours many years before us, so he's been doing the digital nomad. He's published a couple books actually about it. He's a scuba diver instructor as well. He's been traveling around the world. He's been freelancing and running companies all over the world. He once was in a call with a client and a kangaroo appeared behind him on camera, right? Right. If you want to hear that entire story, it's on the other video we had from the conference. But maybe let's just focus with the first question, and let's go through the list of topics we had for tonight. One of them is how to transition to remote. The second one would be security, and the third one would be communication, right? How to communicate with clients, investors, and so on and so forth. I wanted to start off by moving to remote. Seems easy, but it's not. A lot of people seem to feel that whenever they're doing remote is trying to replace the office, bring the office into their homes. But that's not true, right? I was yesterday, DHH and Jason Fried from Basecamp, they had a 2-hour long session online, and they were covering all of these topics. So a lot of my ideas come from that conversation. So how would be your approach for people who are doing this for the first time?
So I think the main difference from what I've done in the past several times, or what you guys at MarsBased have been doing, is that we have done it because we wanted. It was our own initiative. But now people is forced into it, but at least the ones who are lucky to be able to work remotely. So we had time to prepare, we had time to adapt, and we had time to get ready, not only ourselves, our clients, our colleagues, and that takes time and adaptation. But since it was our own decision, we could do it at our own pace. Today, the story is a bit different. People is forced to do this, and in a very abrupt way. So they have to adapt very quickly, not just people, the employees, the ones at home, but also the companies as a whole, and the clients, the partners, providers, everyone. So the first thing is that it is okay to slow down things for a little bit until we all adapt, and to do a lot of trial and error. And this is what everyone says at the end of the day. What works for me doesn't necessarily have to work for you or work for somebody else. The main difference is that in a big company, what works for me has to work for everyone. So we need to adapt better in terms of communication, time zones, cultural differences, and so on and so forth. The second part that I want to mention is that it's actually a different thing working remotely than working from home. Especially because one thing is being in one different place of the world every week or every month, and a different one is being able to set up your own little home office where you can put things exactly the way you want them in order to make the transition smoother. So I think we can focus more on the latter, on people working from home, because that's what that's the gist of today's situation and what most people will be having. There's also two big differences, I would say. One is whether you have kids or not. And it's actually a very big one. I'm sure most of you saw, I think it was last year or a couple of years ago, this video of this journalist who was doing a conference at home, and then suddenly the kid ran into the place. I love that video because it explained exactly how the situation is for most of us, working from home or working remotely, and the additional difficulties that we have when we are having this. And a lot of you who have kids or family at home or other responsibilities, and we all have lots of stuff in our heads now, what's going on, the quarantine, all these kind of things. We do have to cater for those specificities. We'll talk later about working asynchronously, synchronously, and this kind of. So with all these things in consideration, for me, the first thing is taking things slow and evaluating very often. So I could say for me, what works the best is making sure I have a work profile and a home profile in my computer. I'm talking about different user profiles in my computer. So I clearly make a difference when I'm working and when I'm on my own time. Even if you can have one home office for work-related activities, and then when you're just playing video games or chatting or doing it or Facebooking, you go somewhere else. Make sure that your brain understands you are in different spots. But again, those are things that work for me. What I've been doing over the years has been trying one thing and then evaluating whether that works for me or not. Great. One very common technique is Pomodoro, which is setting some either kitchen clock or any of the many tools that you can install on your computer to have 20 or 25 time slots where you're focused on one task, 5 minutes to stop, and then every 3 or 4 Pomodoros have a 20 minutes to stop. And all the different combinations, people do 20 minutes, 15 minutes, 60 minutes. For me, Pomodoro doesn't work, but it does work for a lot of people to make sure that while at home, when you have maybe a PlayStation just 1 meter away, or your kids are starting to cry or something like that, you make sure you're fully focused on your stuff. What I would say is you need at least a couple of weeks to try out all these techniques for all these formats.
That's
make sure all the obvious things, right? Make sure you get dressed. Make sure you get into the mood, even if possible, not go out of the street, or at least nowadays, but leave your home office, do a few rounds as yourself, try to at least walk 50 meters within your house, and then sit on your computer and start working. Make sure you dress the same way you would dress into the office. If you had to go to wear the unfortunate case of a suit and a tie, well, why not? If you would take any other clothes, just go with those clothes, but never ever work in your pajamas.
I actually dressed up for this call. I wouldn't be able to teach you otherwise. No, but that's a really good point. I was making a point this morning on Facebook and on Twitter especially, that everybody seems to be an expert on remote working nowadays just because they've been 48 hours confined or 24, right? I was like, great. Just don't try to spread the word of your truth is absolute, right? You have a really good point. Different things don't work for different people, right? For instance, some people, like you mentioned, they do use Pomodoro. Maybe it doesn't work for you. Or having a separate room, that's the work room, right? But that's, for instance, it doesn't work for me. I'm working from my living room, right? And that's where I have got my office, but I don't need a separate room. But I know a lot of people need it, or some people need to work from a co-working space, something like that, right? Because they want to feel that social aspect. Working remotely doesn't necessarily mean working from home. I wanted to touch on something really specific because maybe we'll be talking more and more, and especially a lot about the tech part of the world, right? And we're more prepared than anybody. You know, even designers, marketers, and developers, they're super prepared for that. What's your advice from people who are not into tech and who are not especially tech savvy?
So there's no way around it. We're going to have to adapt. But for me, the most important thing is not the how you do your work, but how you perceive others' work, how you build trust, and how you build coordination with other people. I'm talking about believing that on the other side, people is actually working.
Yeah.
And this kind of things that happen to be in the office. But now we have all this distance to evaluate. So you're right, in the software industry, we had we have a bit of advantage because we've been doing this for a longer time. Other roles in the company or even other industries where possible will have to adapt to this. So for me, the most important thing is the company culture that you create within your group. Whether you're a freelancer and it's your own culture, a small company with 5-10 people, or a big corporate with hundreds of people around the world, and how you spread the word that you need to work in a culture of trust, where you can also track KPIs and make sure things get done. Because at the end of the day, the business needs to keep going. But you need to trust people. You need to trust that someone at home is actually doing some work and not playing PlayStation. So I think that is the main gap that the other roles in the companies will have to go through. Teamwork, how to do the stand-ups that Scrum teams are very well used to do. How do you do that in sales teams or marketing teams that some do, but some others are not that well used to it. How do you organize your day in terms of calls or video conferences and time differences? So the old mindset of I'll go to the office, put my work hat, start doing stuff, and then that's it, is gone. But also the old mindset of if I see you sitting in your chair, it means you're working. Yeah. So it's a whole change from going into synchronous work into asynchronous work.
Yeah.
And
we're going to go into that in the third part, because I want to talk more deeply about what's async and what's sync. But one thing that's really important to touch on here is what you said before, is you will not get it right the first day. Obviously, you and I have been doing this for well over 10 years now, so we might be biased and we see that everything is super easy, right? But one important thing I wanted to convey and to send to everyone is that when I started doing this like 13 years ago, or even 15 years ago, when I started doing remote, I was like, I didn't even know that was called remote, right? And a lot of things didn't work. They were not adapted. We're super lucky now that we have all this technology and things in place. But even at the time, like the first days, weeks, I was not communicating right. I was not answering emails when I should have. I was not taking calls when I should have. I was not setting expectations. So if you right now have transitioned from a non-remote work-friendly environment into an all-remote that is going home with family, with children, with a house that is not prepared, you maybe don't have the office material, you don't have access to your software or even to your computer because it's a desktop computer at work, or you require special access, whatever, just don't freak out. Don't freak out. Companies know they will slow down for a bit, and you will have time to kind of like to figure it out. We're all figuring this out together. So if there's anything specific, that's why I said, if you want to ask something, just use the Q&A. We're getting the first questions now, or use the chat. But I thought it would be great to talk a little bit about the non-tech people, because they are the less prepared for this, and they're the ones who are freaking the fuck out, actually. So how about, for instance, people whose companies, they are using like old desktop computers, they're still sitting in the office, they don't have like VPNs in place or like processes or documentation or access through remotely. How would you advise these companies to do like a really slow transition to make this happen?
My first advice would be to ditch those desktops and buy laptops right away.
Great.
Because that is already an investment for the future. We don't know how long this is going to last.
Yeah.
But what we know is that, or what I believe at least, is that this will bring remote to stay. So this will be a before and after on in companies' cultures where remote was not a thing or was a taboo. Now people will realize what they need in order to do remote properly. So my first advice would be ditch those desktops and then go straight into laptops. Big corporations would have things like thin clients, where the only thing you need is a very small thing, like or Chromebooks or stuff like that, where everything is on the cloud. And that is the way to go. Make sure that, and I think it's related to one of the questions, security. Make sure that all the data has a proper governance system. This is a lot of work on the IT teams. How do you make sure the data doesn't go out? Cybercrime is under control. One of the things that remote work brings, or work from home, like the bring your own device trend was some time ago, is that it opens doors in terms of security. And if you don't do it right, depending on how big your company is and how critical your data is, you might have some problems. So ditch those desktops, make sure you have laptops with a proper VPN installed and stuff like that. And make sure that all the data is properly backed up in the company servers in the cloud. But that there is nothing really on the companies, on those laptops or on people's computers. Mm-hmm. Many companies, because this had to be done on a rush, have been asking employees to use their own laptops or their own computers at home. And I think that is fine. That is okay, because the computer itself today is the commodity. It's just the place where you hammer your keyboard.
But there are security issues, right? Security
exactly.
Issues. Yeah.
And it's not that difficult today to implement those policies. If you use Google Apps, for example, you make sure that everything is on the share folders on Google Drive, that is on Google Spreadsheets, Google Docs, and so on and so forth.
Yeah.
Microsoft has exactly the same tool set. So there are plenty of tools around where you can avoid putting that spreadsheet on your desktop and then forget about it. But if you realize about this, it's not that different from the office culture. What if today you have a company with 20 people, everyone with their own desktop computer with their own power, and documents in their desktop or in any folder that are not backed up? It is exactly the same situation. The actual physical place where that computer is located inside an office or inside someone else's house, for me, is irrelevant. This is more a IT governance concern that goes beyond working remote. It has to be done no matter what. You know what I mean?
Yeah, definitely. One of the things, actually, it's a really good point, and it brings me to one question I wanted to ask you, but somebody asked it, and I think it's Pablo Navarrete. So thank you for that question. A lot of companies, when transitioning to remote, they instill the culture of fear, right? It's like, wow, all my employees are now remote. I cannot see them. You also touched on this very briefly before that. And how do they know they're working? And they are installing not only time tracking software, but like monitoring software. So software that takes like screenshots of your screen every 10 seconds, something like that, or requires you to perform certain actions just to know that you were there, right? So what's your view on that? Because if I share my view, I'm gonna say a lot of blasphemy.
I think we share the same view, but I'll try to do it without the blasphemy. So this is nothing new. There's a few freelancer online marketplaces in the world that have been very active and very successful. Odesk, Elancer, and freelancer.com, sites like this. And most of them do have this kind of monitoring software because of trust. Now, if you're hiring a freelancer in a low-income country to save some bucks on freelancers, some people would want the assurance of getting the work done. And for them, maybe it's not enough to see the actual work process or see the actual output. This has been very common in the software industry when managers do not understand the process and the output of the work we have been doing. I think, again, it's not a matter of remote or non-remote. If your manager doesn't have this mindset, it will be very difficult to change unless you put very specific measures in place to make sure that those KPIs, OKRs, or anything you want to show are done the right way. So one of the things that I've been seeing people doing for a long time is applying the Scrum in different roles and industries than software. So what Scrum does is with the dailies, the daily stand-ups, with the retrospects, the plannings, and so on and so forth, where you do Scrum bot or any other modality that you like, at the end of the day is ways of following up with trust. So giving people autonomy and the capacity to make decisions, but at the same time being able to follow up. So I've seen a lot of people in marketing teams, sales teams starting to do this kind of daily stand-ups in order to build this trust. Now, the same way that we need time to adapt to the remote work, companies, managers, CEOs do need time to adapt to this and to learn to trust their teams. Now, if a CEO or a manager doesn't trust their team, I think they don't trust their team in the office or at home. And that is a problem by itself.
It's a cultural.
So maybe it is cultural, and maybe it's a wake-up call to perhaps change company or try to change that company culture. So remote work does put a new level of difficulty into that, because this guy or girl is not seeing, hey, what's going on? Why I don't see my guys? Are they sitting and whatnot? I remember a few companies in the past, a couple of companies in the past, who did have a policy for the remote workers of having the camera always on.
Oh yeah, that's terrible too.
And this was on a pre-Slack time. So some were using HipChat at the very early days or Hangouts, but people was having the policy of having the camera always on. And if you think about it, it kind of tries to bring the office into the house or into whatever you are. But that is the wrong concept. You don't have to bring the office. You have to change completely all your processes. So you can trust you can trust in the process of people checking in and checking out. You have
better
to
example of really bad company culture, which is I've even been in a meeting where the company required the employees to bring sunglasses on because that reflected their screens, right? Because in a remote call, people would be like chatting or doing other stuff and you wouldn't know. But like with sunglasses on, there's no way to do it. Sorry, I interrupted you.
Well, it's a way of doing pair programming, right?
Yeah. No, but like, sorry, I interrupted. But that's one thing. That's a really good point because it all boils down to company culture at the end of the day, right? If they don't trust you doing remotely, probably they didn't trust you in the first place in the office. But just because you're there, there's some layer of trust. And another thing that's really relevant now is probably, because companies are not prepared for this super remote or hard remote environment, you wouldn't have hired the same kind of people. Some people are really trustable to work in an office, but they are not to be trusted working remotely just because they have different, personalities or ways of behaving, right? So, I mean, just because you wouldn't have hired them in a full remote environment, now you're forced to work with them, right? And
that's right.
Not only for the workers or the employees, but also for the managers. Some managers.
Let me give you one example. Sales teams. So sales teams have been traditionally always out and about, right? In most companies, the salesman and saleswoman have been on their car, on their phone, visiting clients. You seldom see them in the office, maybe for one meeting a week or something like that, right? Especially in outbound companies where they sell stuff. And this is not a surprise for anyone. I was like, hey, where is this sales guy? I'm sure he's having dinner with the client just as like enough.
Yeah.
No, I mean, sales teams had very specific KPIs with quadrants and all that. And sales managers, sales directors have had this under control for years.
Yeah.
It's a very mature role in the remote work thing. It's just that we didn't call it remote. It's just the traveler salesman, right? Exactly. So in many cases, we used to think, hey, we software developers can teach the world about working remote. I think that's not right. Sales teams can teach the world about how to work remote because they've been traveling the world, being everywhere, or support teams and stuff like that. Those have been the ones that spearheading the remote work. But we didn't call it remote. We called it, we go and see a client, and we see 5 clients a day.
Or support. Usually support is not even in the same office. You got like a really small office in a cheaper area of town or something like that. There's the support guys and they're never in the office. How do you know they work, right?
Exactly.
Now that's a really good point. How would you as a manager, right? Let's assume most of our audience tonight are entrepreneurs. They've got startups. Let's call it like 20 to 50 people maximum. A lot of these people are not prepared for remote work. How would you advise them to go about it? Like what kind of books can they read, trainings, what kind of best practices can they adopt from right now?
So the main skill that you need to work, no matter your industry, role, skill set, the main skill that you need to work on when you go remote is communication.
Great.
Make sure that your communication is straight, direct, but also assertive, that you have this famous now concept of radical candor, if you will. So that book, Radical Candor, could be one good advice. But it's about communication. And we see this, but my main message today is that working remote is really not that different from being in an office.
Yeah.
Look at how you worked in the office, how you were slacking a colleague that maybe you didn't even see that day. You didn't cross in the coffee machine.
Yeah, no.
But you're still working with that person through Slack or a video call. How many people in companies with different offices, how many people connect to a web conference from the same location, just sitting in different places? And then we have 5 people connecting from the Barcelona office, 5 people connecting from the New York office, and so on and so forth.
Or different floors, right?
Or different floors, yeah, exactly. So we have been doing remote work already.
Yes.
But I think commuting. What we're doing today is remove the commuting and remove the hassle of going into the same place. And we had these problems. How many times we have replied, myself, right? Replied an email maybe in an angry way or something, and then say, I should have done this by voice.
Yeah.
Because Slack messages, emails lack context, lack a lot of information in the channel. So because we are remote, because we are at home, doesn't mean we cannot do a very quick call to someone in the same way that we would go to see someone that is 50 meters away, provided that we don't remove their focus or something like this. So for me, the most important thing is acknowledging that we're lacking parts of the communication because of the channel, because of the technology. Even a web conference, even if we see our faces, we're lacking a lot of this context. We're lacking being able to go grab a beer after work. And that is very important. I've been doing remote work for ages, but still I try to at least meet in person every single person of my team when possible. Yeah. Because that rapport that you create helps you moving forward. So this communication starts there. Cross-cultural communication. If your company is big or we work with people from all over the world, the way I write in English, not being my native language, is completely different the way someone in the United States will understand it, someone in Argentina or someone in Japan. Yeah. And that is also very important. So when we are in the same place, maybe we fuck up with one message, but we can just say, go and say, hey, I'm sorry, I didn't mean this. And that is okay. You see my eyes, you see my face, you see that the channel is being adapted. But on a Slack message, you didn't get that.
Yeah.
So the other set of books that I would recommend are the ones from Basecamp, of course, all the trilogy of remote work, which these guys have been the spearhead of remote work in some sense. But other than that, is what we were saying at the beginning. Whatever works for you doesn't have to work for somebody else. But the main backbone is communication in that sense.
Yeah, there's actually one other, thanks for bringing that up. And one thing that I think most people don't realize is when you're working in a remote friendly environment, let's say your company requires you to be in the office, but you've got some like freelancers doing remote or the DevOps guy being remote, you create first and second class citizens, right? That's a really important concept, right? What does that mean? It's like where the majority of the people is, that's where everything gets decided. And the rest of the people get it later and everything is decided, right? You will decide things in the office and then you will send an email to the ones not in the office. Look, we decided this, or the company retreat is going to be there. We voted this last Friday. So in other words, fuck you. You're invited to come, but you didn't decide, right? One thing that I think it's good or that we can take away from this circumstance right now is that we're all in the same boat now. We're all first-class citizens or second-class citizens, because I think people will not be gathering to decide things, right? And so it's extremely important when you, even in this situation right now where everybody works from home, one of the things that's a really good practice for companies doing remote is communicate always to everyone at the same time, right? Because if you tell somebody, like, let's say you build a product feature, right? And you decide, of course, you can agree on some things with the designers, but it's a major thing or a company thing, a structural thing, as send an email to everybody, right? And then jump one-on-one and start answering questions and all of that. But if you tell first one team, because you were talking to them, oh, by the way, we have decided this. Now I'm going to tell the other teams I've got in this other call. And then at the end of the day, I'm going to send the email to everybody. That sucks. That sucks because you feel left out if you're on the other end, right? What other good practices have you got in terms of mass communication or even like communicating really difficult things?
Yeah. So I think there are only two types of companies, remote companies and non-remote companies. There's no such thing as being in the middle with freelancers or people who are working remote. Those people will always be second-class citizens. And there is no process that can avoid that. You can say, hey, I'm going to have an all-hands meeting here, or I'm going to make sure the communication goes through. But if the majority of your staff is still in the office, you have to count that most of what happens in one company happens between meetings, happens in a corridor. And that is what that is exactly what is going on. Someone going to have a quick conversation with someone is like a network type of communication. So there is no such thing as half remote company. If you work remote for a company whose majority of the staff is in an office, you're going to be a second-class citizen, or at least I don't know the way to avoid that, because it's human nature. If we're in the same physical space, we're going to talk about what we had in a conference just 30 minutes ago, and that conversation that we have will modify the outcome of the situation. And then there's always company politics and office politics and all these things that if you work in big companies, you for sure are aware of. So either you go fully remote, and then you can have an office, but make sure that every single thing is remote. And I mean, not have even conference rooms or meeting rooms. Everything is done remotely. And the second thing is full transparency. So I'm talking about fully public Slack channels, mailing lists that involve everyone, and making sure that this transparency is there. We go back to company culture. So when you have a manager sending an emails only to a few people in the team, doesn't matter whether you're remote or not. That is already creating this kind of classes in the system. So transparency and deciding what type of company you are, fully remote or not remote. But don't lie yourself and try to be something in the middle.
But there's another classification here. It's fully synchronous companies and asynchronous companies. So for the sake of simplicity, we're going to call them like sync and async, right? Well, the main difference being, synchronous companies, you all have got, to a certain extent, overlapping schedules, and you're expected to be doing more like what you said, either live coding, so pair programming, or chatting all the time, or being on calls, sharing screen all the time. And asynchronous organizations, who usually like span over a broader range of time zones, and they prefer written communication in an email or a Basecamp thread or something more like thought through than chatting, right? That it's a good way to introduce the tech stack. A couple of questions are regarding to that. So what I wanted to say is like, I know your answer, but which one do you think is the better to adopt for a company that is right now, accepting this reality? Not for a super company who's an expert like you and I, but let's
forget about remote work for a second. Let's assume that there is no big fuck up in the world. There is no coronavirus, and everyone is going to the office and doing their 8 to 5 office shift. And let's assume you have your engineering team, 15, 20 folks just doing their things. The rest of the company doesn't really understand completely what they're doing. And then you have some kind of request that you need a new feature or something that a client brought in and you need it done, right? So you would go to the first engineer you find sitting there, and you would say, hey, can you do this for me now? Do you think that would work?
That's actually how a lot of companies are structured. Like I always give the same example, which is I remember in my previous company that we were using Microsoft Exchange. And there's a delay between you send an email and the other person receives it. So one of my managers would always send me an email about, hey, we need to do this now. He would come to my desk, tap me on the shoulder, and
Did you read that email?
I would be like, no, dude, it's arriving now. And bing, so.
Exactly. So this is something that in software we've been fighting for a long time, right? To make sure that this doesn't happen. And again, forget about remote work. It's something that 20 years ago, we realized is not good, and that's why we have different planning processes, different methodologies, whether agile or not agile, the different ways of organizing this. This is why we have project managers, product managers, program managers. We have all these rules to make sure we organize our work in a coherent way and mature way, so we can make sure that we focus on what matters to the company and not just in the last urgent thing that someone thought about. So now translate this concept into remote work. Isn't it the same thing? Would you just go on Slack and say to the first engineer, hey, could you do this for me now?
Yeah.
Probably the answer would be, hey, could you, if this is urgent, could you please open a Jira ticket? Oh, God bless, not Jira. Could you open a ticket, or maybe could you ask the product owner of this product? We have already processes for this to make sure that we work on we make a difference between the urgent and the critical and the important, and to make sure that we don't get interruptions like this.
Yeah.
So, and back into the sales team, you wouldn't go to the sales guy who is in Madrid and tell him, hey, a client just called, could you go and visit him in Vigo?
Yeah, that's a good example.
Probably not. He would say, hey, next week I'm going to be in North Spain, so I can schedule a meeting with him. So it's exactly the same thing. I don't think fully synchronous companies should exist anymore, remote or non-remote. So in that sense, all the processes that we've been working, especially in the software industry, but also in marketing and sales and in all the business areas, work exactly the same way now. So, but there's a caveat here. When you're not in the office, people expect, or non-trusting managers expect you to reply the chat message immediately.
Exactly.
If you're not answering right now, it means you're not working.
Yeah.
But hey, maybe you go to someone's desk and he's not in his desk. He might be, or she might be in the toilet, having lunch,
or smoking,
smoking, or whatever, or having a meeting. So we're back in the topic before. It's about trust. Now, people, when companies start working remotely, and this is quite funny, they expect to make asynchronous processes, make them synchronous.
Yeah.
And this is what we need to make them understand, especially the managers layers and the CEOs and the Cs in general. That you didn't have a synchronous process before. Have you thought about that? It's not a synchronous process. So why should it be synchronous now?
Yeah. I tried really hard to understand why would a company adopt a fully synchronous model, right? And the only possible solution, of course, I'm biased because our company is 100% asynchronous. We're a super calm company. Nothing is SAAP, nothing is urgent, and all of that. Shameless plug. But I think the only situation in which I would find it acceptable is when you're mentoring people, right? Or the first weeks when you're, onboarding new employees there, they need to be trained, they need to be mentored, they need to be, gating or like picking up on new projects and methodologies and all of that. But outside of that, I think it makes no sense, right? So one of the things sorry, go ahead.
We are back into the communication. Now, when you're working remote, in many cases, you will be more efficient because you will have less disruptions, but you also have to account for additional communication. You have to invest in more communication. When you did one-on-ones with your team members once every 2 weeks, maybe now you need to do them once a week.
Yeah.
Or even on demand, or more often. When a company did a town hall every 5 months, maybe now you need to do them every 15 days. And it doesn't have to be a town hall where everyone is in the same place or in the same conference room. Maybe it can be a properly redacted email or even a video. People think that it's only email or a web conference. You can record yourself and send a message, and it already carries some weight into it. Asynchronous video conferences, and that is perfectly all right, because it takes more time for me to write properly the words I want to write in the way I want to convey them, than to just record myself 5 minutes and say what I want to say in the way I want to say. And people would say, yeah, I'm smiling, or I'm angry. We didn't hit the sales target for this quarter. And that is more difficult to put an email. So you maybe might be more efficient by working at home, by reducing a lot of overhead that you had in an office. But you have to make sure you overspend or overinvest in communication. Even if it is only to say, hey, how are you doing? How are you doing? Fine. Awesome. You look tired today. Are you okay? Fine. See you later. Enough.
Yeah. One thing I really wanted to say is that on the other side, on one side of the spectrum, you've got the over-communicative companies that are super synchronous and they're, constantly bombarding you with notifications and with mentions on the chat and all of that. So you're constantly interrupted, right? On the other side, there's people who take it to the other extreme and never communicate at all. And that's also not good, right? I think that the balance, the perfect balance, if you were to ask me, is that because you never communicate synchronously, when you use it, it's important, right? If I've got somebody in the team who says like, hey, I need to speak now, somebody from MarsBased, I know it's important. It's probably like, well, I don't know. He's gonna say that he's gonna be that, or he's quitting the company, or he's having an issue with the client, something like that. But he wouldn't ping me to say like, hey, can you check this email for me, or can you check this task now? It doesn't really make sense, right? So there's a balance, and it's hard to find it. It comes with time, right? One other question that I've got here from the team, from people, I think it's from Priscilla, is what do you think about live rooms like Discord or Tandem? I think we're getting into muddy waters because I know your opinion on these kind of things. But what do you think about these tools? Let's talk about the tools actually to organize. Let me click here, see what happens. Okay.
Sorry, I lost you for a couple of seconds. What was the question?
It's about the tools that we're using, right? A lot of them are mentioned here, like Discord or Slack, where it's super synchronous. But what would be what's your stack? What's your tech stack? What is communication platforms that you use?
So we currently use Office.
Yeah.
We currently use the whole Office suite, so SharePoint, Office 365 and whatnot. We use Slack, and we use Zoom as well for communication. And I think that's pretty much it. And we have some internal systems for HR, for tracking staff and whatnot, like stuff for clients. Yeah. But the main thing for communication is just that. But I honestly think that the stack itself doesn't really matter. It's about how you use it. So are you using Slack or Hangouts? Each has its pros and cons. I think Slack over notifies you. Then you can change that if you want.
Yeah.
The email is the email. There's no way around that, unfortunately, or at least no one has come with the bright idea on how to revolutionize the email. And then the documentation and the processes. If you're a software developer, probably you have your own IDE and your own way of checking in the code and whatnot. If your work is making PowerPoints and Excel spreadsheets like mine, it doesn't really matter if you use Google or Office. So we recently went from Google to Office migration. And of course, when people is used to one system, there's going to be some friction to move to another one. But again, it's how you use it. So I'm really agnostic to the stack, as long as it works and the information is in the cloud and in a secure way. I see someone was actually speaking about that. You have to make sure that, especially for onboardings and offboardings, the process is very, very thorough. So in companies that don't have a very well-defined onboarding and offboarding process, not only from the HR perspective, but also from the IT perspective, which permissions this person needs to have, which systems needs to access and whatnot, then if you don't have it, you need to create one. So your IT team is probably one of the key teams in your remote transformation on this kind of stuff. If your company is big enough or needs your company needs to take really good care of security, you need to use some kind of central authorization system. So tools like Okta, Auth0, and whatnot, to make sure that you just click in one place and that person who just left the company doesn't have any more permissions or any more accesses. If the person is a DevOps or system administrator, then the process is completely different. You need to make sure you have a very thorough process on removing keys, removing accesses, roles, permissions, and whatnot. But at the end of the day, it's having checklists for pretty much everything. Onboarding, this, and that. Team onboarding. Hey, there's a new marketing intern on this team, or a new developer, front-end developer for this team. There's a new salesperson for this team. These are the things that you need to do. So documenting stuff, not necessarily about how we do things, but what we have to do, is one of the things that can be important, especially if your company is big or if you have a lot of processes. Now, I'm going to repeat myself. This is no different than if you have a work in the office. How many times, I'm sure many of you have joined companies and were put on a chair and say, there you go, now do some work, whatever you do, right? Yeah. So again, it's not different. The only difference is that before, when that happened to you, if you were lucky, you had a colleague sitting next to you who would say, don't worry, I'll guide you, right?
Yeah.
So something that is very useful, and especially in remote companies, and you briefly mentioned that before, is having a mentor. Making sure that when you join a remote first company, you have someone who will be accompanying you for at least a few weeks to make sure that you're there. Because when you're new to a company and you're sitting at home, the feeling of being alone is quite big. So that can be frustrating at times. Having someone who doesn't have to be your manager necessarily. Actually, it's better if it's not your manager, but having someone who can show you the all the in and outs of the company, the little things, who's who, someone to remind you what are the things. Hey, what was the name of the guy? I'm too shy to ask again. All these kind of things that in an office are not a big deal, but when you're at home, things get a bit more tough.
It's more easy to get stuck on something, right? Since we're nearing the end, I wanted to ask you, because a lot of people say like, hey, it's okay, can we extend it a little bit? Would it be okay if we took like, I don't know, an extra half an hour or something like that? Because we haven't touched many of the things. There's a lot of questions, and
it's my fault if I talk too much.
No, it's really good because it's super interesting, and I don't want to interrupt now. So if we'll be just going a little bit over the time, so feel free to stick with us if you're interested in this, because we need to talk about security. We need to talk a little bit more about communication, right? So let's shift to security. Now that we were mentioning tools, what would be like the bare minimum that companies should implement right now in terms of security, as in encrypting their hard disk of their laptops, like changing password, using a password manager, VPN, all of that? What would be your minimum things if you needed to do something today?
Yeah, so it completely depends on the type of work. So assuming a typical company that works either sales, software.
Let's put a 10 people startup.
So a VPN might not be really necessary if you have everything on the cloud. So the VPN is necessary if you have to access company resources that are on Amazon Web Services or Azure Place or something like this. So if your team needs to access these places, definitely you need a VPN that connects to a Bastion, which is the main bottleneck or main funnel, so you can get access or not to those places. But if you don't do that, if you're, I don't know, there are design agencies that don't need that really. So now I've seen in the last few weeks that lots of companies are setting up VPNs like crazy. And that was true when we had in every office a small rack with a small server with data and whatnot, an Active Directory and stuff like that. And if your company is still like that, then definitely you need that VPN and that setup. But if you're a leaner company and you're not connecting to company servers and stuff like this, maybe you don't need a VPN. You mentioned one that is very important, a password manager. I think that a password manager is important for yourself, not just for the company. And making sure that everything has two-factor authentication or any other measure like this. If your company can afford it, a centralized authorization system, where it's with an Active Directory, a system like Okta or similar, is really useful to keep the governance of your platform. Those tend to be expensive, but it really saves you from a bad day. I think now all the Mac computers come with encryption by default, but again, if you have a PC, you make sure that all your data is encrypted. Because you might be moving with your computer from there and there, and what you don't want is people to enter your account and start getting access to the information. And then making sure that all your stuff is in the cloud. And then how to secure that stuff in the cloud is a completely different conversation, right? Making sure that the governance accesses and whatnot on those places is done the right way. Again, not different from what we used to do before. But let me give you an example. Several years ago, I think it was like 7 years ago, someone broke into our office and they took all our laptops.
I remember, we were having a meeting that day, and we arrived and you're like, we're not having the meeting because we have no office.
You're right, but this is a story that happens to many people. Unfortunately, people can break into your office and take your laptops, desktops, and whatnot. And actually, that was 2 days before Black Friday, and we were an e-commerce company. So that was we even thought it was espionage or something like this. Anyway, the point is that losing data can happen to you both remote and in an office. So what I'm saying here is exactly the same governance that I would apply in a non-remote environment. Password management, an Active Directory-like type of system. If you don't like Microsoft, you can use your Google Apps account for the same thing, to making sure that you have one single entry access to your systems. You use single sign-on for everything. Do you use Jira and Confluence? Well, make sure your accounts are connected through single sign-on or SAML or any other tools like this. So the only thing you need to do when someone accesses, when someone is when you do the offboarding, is remove his Google account or his user on Active Directory and anything like this. So making sure there is a simple process, really simple process, where one click to onboard, offboard someone, and then go for it. My only suggestion is not to do not to overkill, not to over-engineer things. If you're a 10-people company, probably you don't need one full IT person working for you, unless you work with some really deep security staff and or something that requires a lot of security.
I was going to say that, just because we've seen that in even really small companies, like let's say our friend here was asking for a 10-people company, right? What's required, like VPN, cloud backups, and whatever. It's like, well, first get the basic things right. Like, is every employee using a strong password on their Mac? Because a lot of people are not. They're using 0000 or something like 1234. Are people accessing their work tools like Slack or Trello or GitHub using their personal email? Because if so, their personal email probably has got a shared password, right? So it's really, really easy to hack into really small companies. And if you don't get this right, you don't need a VPN, you don't need single sign-on, you don't need anything, just because everybody can break into your company.
The main security threats that are active today are social engineering threats, phishing and the likes. And if you over-engineer your processes, what might happen is that your people will go around those firewalls or those problems in order to be able to do work. So it's this kind of balance of how I am efficient at work, but at the same time, make sure that I have proper security. And I myself had to do really dark things in the past to bypass some of the security staff from my former companies that I won't say here, only with a beer when I'm back in Barcelona. But so it's all about that. I've seen companies connecting through a VPN to a secure location and then having time machine doing backups of all their computers. And then that time machine was logged in under one account. And then they had in that same room the hardware double multi-factor authentication device to access the root account of their servers. That worked for them, and it was secure, or secure enough at least. So if you have data that is important to someone, it's likely someone will try to get inside and get it. The weakest link is us people, because we can be fooled, we can be lied upon, so it's VPN. Well, yes, if you have servers, absolutely, you need a VPN, but not just the VPN. You need a whole setup in your infrastructure to make sure that even if your VPN gets compromised, you have other processes in place. I've seen companies that had super secure process with firewalls, VPNs, and whatnot, but then they have one load balancer completely open to the public, and with that could be accessed from the outside. So,
or a password on a Post-it note on your desk wall, right?
Exactly.
There's another thing, like for instance, our friend Gerard brings up in the chat, is like a really simple thing is to force people to change their passwords every few months, right? They do it like every few months. But some companies don't even do that. They don't even do the basics, right? So
and it's free. It's automatic. When you set up your Active Directory, your Google Enterprise account, you put that a minimum password 10 characters with the digits and whatnot, and change every 3 months. So it's there. Why not using it?
I know, and that brings me to the next question, which is really interesting from Pablo Navarrete. It's a bit of a legal background, but is how to comply with GDPR and security compliance if you move like drastically from like literally overnight into a new environment where your company is not prepared for that, right? So how would you go about it? Or is it okay to kind of like work around it for a couple of days while you fix it? Or how would you do something like this in your company? Like, especially when you were working at Rakuten, right? It was like super strong security because you were processing shit tons of passwords and payments, right? So it's extremely critical information, and payments stuff is information that cannot be shared or even sold to other companies, right? So how were you treating this kind of data? How would you do it in a fully remote environment?
So I'm not a lawyer, so I cannot speak with full confidence about this. But if I'm not mistaken, near GDPR or the newest California Ag law and these kind of things, they don't ask about where your employees are. What they tell us is your employees won't see or PCI compliance. Your employees will not see credit cards from customers. Or if your employees see specific data from your customers, you have to provide them training on how to use it and where are you storing that data. So GDPR tells you, do not get a database dump from your customers and their physical addresses and send them on a spreadsheet through email to your colleague who's sitting next to you. That is what GDPR tells you not to do, if possible.
Yeah, no, one thing is that would be or other compliance, like security compliance in health or in finance, requires you to define where that data will be stored physically and how you will access it, right? But if you have said my data will only be accessed on premise from within my office, and all of a sudden overnight you got to move, outside of that, you will not update that contract, right? So, is there any specific workaround for that? I know it's pretty complex.
I think that the data will stay in the same place. So if you have health, if you have health data in your data center, it will still be there, and your people will use VPN to access that data remotely, and then we'll have to comply with the same regulations of not spreading the data outside of where it's legally confined to. So I think the same applies to it. The data will be in the same place. Not the infrastructure itself doesn't change. The only thing that changes is where we are located and the means that we use to access those places. So you're right with one thing, that is, if you're working with different levels of GDPR, then you do need to ensure, and also with a SOC compliance, for example, in the US, you need to ensure that you have very specific processes in place. Being VPN one of those, but also doing penetration tests every so often, security audits, and password changes. So GDPR actually asks you whether your users are changing passwords, but it's not necessary whether they're using VPN from home or from one room in the office, unless you put a data center or a server in someone's.
I think I lost you for the last two seconds. But if you're done with it, I've got a really specific scenario that maybe it's good bringing it up, because sometimes it's not you who breaches into the compliance and all of that. It's the client, right? So for instance, in our case, we work for many different clients. I remember this one situation where the client, because we couldn't access, the data in security, so the database in production, because of all the security layers and all of that, was a super urgent bug and needed to be fixed because the company was losing like millions every minute, right? And they were like, you got to fix this. It's like, okay, we don't have access. They said, okay, I'm sending you the database over email, production database over email. That moment, we're like, what the fuck? Like, literally, the client broke all the rules, right? And in our case, what we did is we reported that to our client. We stopped everything. So like, we know you're in this situation, but we're breaching the contract right now here. If we have this information, we need to delete it right away, right? And sometimes it'll be like, yeah, just for now, but you can get into really, really big trouble. Have you faced any similar situation, and how have you dealt with it? Somebody like some employee using production data and sending it over, I don't know, Slack, for instance.
Mm-hmm. Nothing like that.
Yeah.
Thankfully, never happened to me. Something to that level. In that case, you would have probably need a certificate of destruction of that database. And then there are ways to get that data officially. You have to sign a specific contract. You have to notify, blah, 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 all these kind of things. Again, I'm not a lawyer, but there are ways to bypass this situation so you could have get access to this database. But it's all about the infrastructure you have. Why would you need to share a whole database dump where you can put that database somewhere in the cloud and give people specific access for the specific actions they need to do for that? So the main risk is people using customers' data to make sure they can do their work. I can imagine data dumps for marketing staff that are outside of the typical workflows. Or sometimes we have a bug in production that affected, I don't know, 10,000 users, and we need to change things, and we need access to those users, make changes, and then apply them back into production. That's something that hopefully you don't have to do ever, but it has happened. And maybe those developers, by the GDPR contract, should not have access to that data. So let me put it this way. GDPR has problems with that when there's a data leak, not when you do that specifically. So you need to, number one, trust your people a lot if you really, really, really need to do it. And number two, make sure that you clean up after yourself in that sense, that if you give permission to someone for something that that person shouldn't have permission, make sure that you clean that afterwards and remove those permissions, that you destroy all the data, all these kind of things. And companies need to operate anyways, and not all companies have the processes in place. So if you send a spreadsheet with 10,000 people data to someone, make sure that person at home removes that spreadsheet right after using it for whatever reason. That would be my only advice.
In that sense, let's circle back a little bit to communication, right? Because how would you communicate? Communication in war times, there's communication in peacetime. And we all know it's, everything's good, everything's fine. You need to be super empathetic and all of that, and the radical candor and all that. What about war times? It might be war times for people now, right? Layoffs, right? Changes of expectation, not many KPIs. Like I know a lot of e-commerce company, unless they sell toilet paper, they're struggling. They're just not selling anything. People are not buying anything that's not fucking toilet paper, right? And so they're preparing for the worst. How would you go about it? Like, would you try to anticipate and over communicate and set the expectations, or what's the right moment to communicate the bad news to people?
So for me, the first thing is transparency. So people understand why things happen. Now, of course, now we all understand the situation we are now, but it doesn't have to be necessarily the case all the time.
Great.
Not only why we're doing this, but the process of making this decision. Because sometimes we say, hey, we have situation A and we decided B, but there's a gap between those two things. This is the process we went through, the options we evaluated, why we discarded them, and why we reached this point. Now, laying off someone is always a bad thing. It's always painful, and not always responds to rational reasons. It doesn't matter whether you're remote or not. It's something that's always tough. And even if you put all the points, even if it makes complete sense, it's going to be painful. So there's nothing that can take that off the table. Obviously, do it by video. Always don't do it by email, by a WhatsApp message or something like this that I've seen lately people doing.
What's a voice message?
It's
Jesus.
And be fully transparent, and people will react in different ways. But you need to, I think in these moments is where companies show the real selves, whether they truly take care of people, take care of clients, take care of shareholders, or profits. And if a company is fully focused on shareholder value, again, it doesn't matter if they are remote or not. When people, companies that have a fully in-office setup before the crisis, they've been firing people in many wrong ways for a long time, right?
Exactly.
I think this all going remote gives us a chance to try to turn that around. with the over communication that I've mentioned before. I don't think there is such a thing as communicating too much, unless someone goes and says, "Hey, buddy, shut up, I got it." All right.
Yeah.
But trying to do by video, trying to do, if you have to do layups, try to do as much as possible one-on-one. Give people time to digest the information. Give people time to ask questions.
Yeah.
To get all the information out of it. Make sure you explain everything and all the options. Not assume anything. Never assume. The problem with remote is that if you assume, you lose your chance on the communication channel. If you communicate something with someone, say, imagine a town hall where you go and communicate, hey, we have to lay off 50% of the stuff.
Yeah.
After that communication, people will stay there. They will reconfort each other. They will speak to each other. They will talk. They might get follow-up questions. But remotely, you don't have that unless you force it to happen, or unless you give people the chance. This kind of follow-up. So there's something to take into consideration.
One thing I can bring up to this topic is that obviously we've had a difficult conversation with our sponsors at Starprime because we had to cancel the events and move online. We had to cancel a conference that was a big part of the sponsorship for everybody, right? So one of the things I think we did right was we proactively called all of them. First of all, we said, hey, is this affecting you? How can we help you? And the third thing was, hey, you need to know this, right? This is how you're going to be affected. Can we compensate in any other way? What can we do to compensate, to give you back the value that you paid for, right? But anticipating the problem and being proactive and transparent and always willing to help, I think that would resolve a lot of situations, right? I know it's still not too late. We're still Wednesday, the first week of confinement, at least here in Barcelona. But if you haven't talked to your clients or your investors or your employees about this,
go on, do now.
do it now. Just don't go to sleep before you do it, right? That also works for your bosses and for your investors, right?
And remember that your bosses are also having a hard time. So I think the one of the specific things of the times we're living now is that we're all in the same boat. We're all having a hard time, and this is only starting. Even if the infection recedes a little bit, we're going to have a very hard time. Pretty much all businesses, all companies, and not all companies will survive, unfortunately. But we can be a bit more empathetic with each other because we're all in exactly the same boat. This is not always the case. In some cases, we push people, we push clients or providers a lot, and we don't understand what's going on the other side because they don't tell us, or because we don't know, or because we are in a completely different situation. Today, we're all either under quarantine or freaking out because of what's going on. Maybe some of us have someone infected, someone who's in the hospital, unfortunately. So it's a moment of being united and being especially considerate, especially empathetic, being very adaptable, and having a lot of patience with everybody, with employees, managers, clients, providers, vendors, with everyone. It's the moment to be more united than ever.
Great. Let's wrap up with some quick questions and quick answers right now, because where some people are already dropping off, and we've got a few questions over here. Maybe let's just touch base on a couple of topics really quickly. First one is a question from our friend and team member Nasia, and she asks that she finds it difficult to work from home because she doesn't have the motivation, right? She's a fairly social person, and so therefore she needs that drive, that energy into room and all that. And obviously she doesn't have this at home. And some of us, it's even worse because we live alone, right? Some people live with their family or whatever, or they live with flatmates. But for those living alone, it's even more difficult to overcome this situation. What would be your top advices for people working from home, finding problems of motivation?
So people used to do like thanks God it's Friday gatherings, or going out on Wednesdays, going out for lunch. My suggestion is to keep those things remote as well. So if on Wednesdays all your team would go together for lunch,
that's a good one.
Just pick your lunch and have lunch with your team with the camera.
Great.
Don't speak about work. Don't speak about anything related to what you do. Just have your lunch, chew, spit if you want, but have a human conversation with your colleagues, exactly the same way you would have in a restaurant or somewhere else. Same, if you would go after work for beers, just grab a beer, grab a glass of wine or a bottle of wine, and drink with your colleagues, with your friends. These times are difficult because normally, even if you work remote, after working, you would go out and enjoy your day. Now it's a moment not just for remote workers, but for all people who are confined at home by themselves or in difficult situations, who need desperately this way of socializing. I've seen people even watching watching series or movies together and talking or talking about it synchronously while they watch it at home. So keep doing the same things you were doing before when you were going to the office, except commuting. Don't do that. But remote, and have the same level of confidence. Again, over communicating.
Yeah. One thing that we did, for instance, our company is 100% office-less, but we meet every 2 months, right? In order to have a couple of days of hands-on sessions and workshops and whatnot, sharing P&L with the employees. We were supposed to do this last week, Thursday and Friday, right? Well, actually, it's only Friday. Thursday is more like, we go only for dinner. But so we decided to keep it and do it online. And the cool thing with it is we had our employees buy breakfast and pizza for lunch, and we paid for that. But we told everyone, just go grab it and jump online on a call. We're going to eat all together, right? It was a bit awkward at the beginning, but it's right on tune with what you said. Next question is from Jordi Jimenez from Mobile Jazz, actually. So have you got any policy on physical security for people working remotely? And what about shoulder surfing? I don't know the concept of shoulder surfing. You probably know it. So it would be my today I learned if you explain it to me.
Yeah. So again, this is not necessarily specific for remote work. I remember one case where one company had a data leak from someone from the finance team who was working on the train, and then the information of a merger got leaked out because someone shoulder looking at their screen, and that actually was bad for the operation. Really and he was just commuting to the office. The people that a lot of time are working on the train or just having conversations on the phone that should be private, but there's you don't know who's listening. Now, being at home is slightly better. It's kind of supposed that at home you are in a confidential environment, but you still need to take care of the security with that, the encryption of the disks, making sure the data is in the cloud, all these things that we discussed before. For key people who are dealing with a specific data, we try to give them it's like screen filters. So only you can only see what's on the screen if you're looking straight, but not from the angles. And that tends to be very, very useful. They go for $10 or something like this. So it's not very expensive, and it really works nice. If I put myself like this only, I wouldn't read my computer. I have to be fully straight. They work with any with any laptop. It's about training as well. So this is the time to train your employees about cybersecurity.
Yeah, it's also, it reminds me when I was working one of my previous companies who had like really shit laptops. You could only see the screen if you were, right in front of it, but not because they had this protection layer. It's because they were shit screens, right? So maybe not paying a lot for laptops would be great for security.
You got that for free.
Yeah, exactly. One question just coming from me out of a purely personal interest. You've been a digital nomad for many years, and right now you're digital nomading around Latin America, right? What's your equipment like? What do you bring with you?
I carry a OnePlus 7 smartphone.
Yeah.
I carry a MacBook Air from 3 years ago, I think.
Great.
I don't think today I would buy another MacBook or a MacBook Pro.
Yeah.
I think they jumped the shark badly, and I don't like the new models. But today I have a MacBook Air. Is for me is the right combination between flexibility, weight, power, and whatnot. And I can even do some development here, even though I've been without coding for some time.
Yeah.
And that's it. I don't need anything else. Just my MacBook Air, the computer. I have obviously earphones and whatnot. What I do is I buy a SIM card everywhere I go. Actually, I buy two, one for each company, because of signal, data packages and whatnot. But that's pretty much everything. Now the life for a digital nomad today is much easier than years ago. 15 years ago, I was the weirdo in a McDonald's trying to get Wi-Fi and all that. You couldn't buy a SIM card. There was no smartphones.
They were locked. They were locked. The phones were locked.
So you can only do Wi-Fi. But now everywhere you go has somewhat decent Wi-Fi.
Yeah.
And that's all I need. People might miss, having, especially developers, having 2 or 3 screens, their own setup. And for those working from home, I do encourage to set up your home office the way you're comfortable with. I mean, if you have to put everything and set things up every day and then remove them every day as well, to set up boundaries, especially if you're with your family, make sure that you discuss all the organization with your partner. If you have to stay with your kids at home these days, how are you going to organize? And so discuss with your partner if you have who stays with the kids and who needs to be fully focused on this specific meeting. So that's fine. Sometimes I do job interviews and my kid jumps in and I don't mind. And I tell the interviewee, hey, look, this is live now. Sometimes I'm in a board meeting and I cannot afford that. So you need to, it's also a lot of communication with your partner if you have one.
Exactly. And last question is, how did you convince your bosses that you were going full remote, fucking off to Latin America for, no return ticket?
No. Well, actually, in the last time you interviewed me, I gave you guys a teaser at the very beginning of the interview.
It was not official yet. It was not official,
so I was not able to communicate this. But my agreement was that at that time we were doing all the due diligence for Zinio, and at that time that was my agreement with our former CEO. And once that process was done, I would just go on a sabbatical. Yeah, and I really wanted to do that. It was a done deal. So what I told the Naviga CEO when the acquisition was done was, look, this is going to happen. What I can do is commit to everything we need to do and do what you need me to do for this process and do it exactly the same way. Now, my last 2 months before starting the trip, even though we have an office in Barcelona, I was not going to the office because I had a different role. So I was actually working from home, even though I had an office 40 minutes away. So what is the difference being here in Peru or at home in Barcelona or in Bolivia or somewhere else?
Just time zone.
As long as my manager trusts me on what I do, I do the work I'm assigned to, and I am reachable, and there is clear communication. There's nothing else. The only difference is that at home, I could build my own home office in a nice way. I could just do the whole ritual that we were talking about before. And here, well, every day is different, especially now. But that is the only difference.
That's perfect.
And I was lucky. I was lucky as well.
Yeah, not a lot of companies would grant you that, and you're in a super senior position, so which to a certain extent it makes it even more difficult. You're not just a designer, right? You're enterprise VP at Naviga Global, which is a super big company. So,
yes and no.
All right.
At the end of the day, every day for me, my day is speaking with people from all over the world. A designer might need more interaction with their direct colleagues.
Yeah.
So being together physically might be more efficient for the designer or for the developer or for the marketing manager than for myself. At the end of the day, what I do is talk.
But you're a more critical role to the company, and your decisions cost a lot of money if you don't get it right, compared to a designer.
But I don't do anything that requires physical interaction.
Yeah.
Except one meeting or another meeting from time to time. So the more executive you are, the more strategic decisions you have to make. So to be honest, my day-to-day is speaking with people like we are doing now, and building PowerPoints and Excel spreadsheets.
Yeah, that's
so.
All right. Thank you very much, Sergio. Thank you very much, everybody who's joined. Thank you very much to everybody who extended their stay, and it's been super cool. I don't know if there's been any kind of technical difficulties, or I hope you liked it. I'm gonna check it out afterwards to some like post-production, and hope you took away some good learnings. We're doing another session on Friday in Spanish with my partner at MarsBased, the CEO, Jordi Andrei. More or less, we're going to touch the same topics, but you will see that the conversation is entirely different because we've got different companies and there are different kind of people, right? Thank you very much again, Sergio.
Thank you.
That's it. Hope to see you all again in person soon. We don't know, for the time being, we will keep doing events like this. Send us ideas on how to improve, what things can be done better. Also tell us what was the worst part of this, right? This question always gets the best answers. What was the worst part of this event? It helps us to improve. It's helped us to do 73 events in a row, right? Thank you very much, and enjoy your week.
Thank you. Take care. Stay safe.
Bye-bye.